hold on to them for a minute. We're going to go to our next panelist, who has, I think, a lot in common with what Toys was presenting. So about kind of empowerment through education, it's a difficult word, culturality, and collaboration. Gideon is, I mentioned, the founder and CEO of Aid for Rural Education Access Initiative. How are you feeling, Gideon?
Well, I feel pumped.
That's very good to hear. That's a good start.
I feel pumped, yeah.
That's a good start. Can you kind of give us, what's your elevator pitch for what do you do in the Aid for Rural Education Access Initiative?
Okay, so once again, I want to say good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you. My name is Prince Gideon Olanrewaju, and I'm from Nigeria. Like Dejan spoke, I'm the Chief Executive Director for Aid for Rural Education Access Initiative. And the vision of the organization is to improve the access and quality of education for poor and vulnerable children in rural communities across Africa. In Africa and in Nigeria specifically, young people from underserved communities and disadvantaged families faces educational exclusion in all forms and disconstruct. So what I do as I lead my organization is to create opportunities for children who would not necessarily have the opportunity to have access to education, but not just education, but quality education. So I believe as time goes on, maybe I will share how we ensure that these young people can have access to education. But I have something that I prepared here, and I don't know if I'm free to...
Go ahead, yes.
Sure.
Share that with us, and then we'll continue the conversation.
Okay, awesome. So when Dejan started, he spoke about the duality of youth involvement in development processes. He spoke about the increased focus on young people and their policies within the UN structure. And he also spoke about the apathy that is currently being experienced with the work of young people. I think I would set the conversation in motion by speaking about the second part, which is how young people are less engaged and the need for us to actually improve the engagement of young people. So to start with what I prepared here, I would not bore you, but I will make it more practicable as possible. I said I feel extremely humbled with the opportunity to share my experiences in this roundtable themed Youth Today's Leader. I would like to start by sharing a bit about what I know about young people. The advent of the SDGs have shown critically that young people are capable of engineering social change anywhere they are and with whatever they have. We are not only passionate and enthusiastic, we are competent and we are confident of the viability of our contributions to development processes, both locally, regionally, or globally. Whether you invite us to the decision-making table or not, we are already leading, we are already creating, and we are already implementing. However, there is a common consensus that without scaling and complementing the effort of young people, the realization of the SDG is just as a pie in the sky. And everyone seated here today, we agree with me that there is a clarion call for the active involvement and integration of young people in key decision-making processes. And this is long overdue. We have had a series of conversation about that. The UN compensated us by creating the Office of the Secretary General on Envoy on Youth. But I think the stagnation of meaningful youth involvement echoes the marginalization that is masqueraded in the form of tokenistic youth engagement. When you go to global events, all we have is youth forums or youth roundtables. You will agree that it is not just about having a seat at the table. It's about the voices being heard. Even when the voices are being heard, it is another thing for our voice to matter and our opinions should count. So the question now is that this narrative should change. It is not about what young people can do, but rather how young people can be better engaged in planning and implementation of development processes. Now, this is where I will make it more practicable. My views on how systems and structures can be re-engineered to recognize the capacity of young people to envision and catalyze sustainable impact as today leaders. The first thing is that there is a need to provide more development opportunities. Even though we are passionate, passion is not enough. How can we translate the passion of young people into real impact at the grassroots? We need to empower them more. And that's the reason why there should be more opportunities for young people to develop the skills, the competencies, so that they can drive the change from the grassroots using a bottom-top approach. Everyone has the responsibility to empower young people. Secondly, there's a need for more platforms and channels that will enable young people to not only connect, but collaborate with decision makers, both within formal structures and outside of formal structures. So I'm calling on more UN agencies, governmental organizations, and institutions to restructure or initiate youth engagement mechanisms. A lot of them are doing incredibly well. The UN DPI, I know, is a youth agency that have a well-structured youth engagement mechanism. But we have many other youth UN agencies that can do better in how they engage and ensure that young people are involved in the decision-making process. Lastly, we must rally support for youth-led organizations to have access to more funding, intergenerational mentorship, and access to pro bono resources. Imagine if Salimotu Fati in the Gambia, Victoria Ibiwoye in Nigeria, Benyon Flemon in Liberia, who are resolute and resilient young people working for education, have access to more funding. I believe that the vision of ensuring that children across the world have access to inclusive and quality education by 2030 is actually being achieved. To powerfully emphasize on the standpoint of millions of young people and children across the world, I would like to remind fellow stakeholders in the development agenda that anything designed for us without us is against us. Now, to conclude, I'll leave this as a moral challenge to young people. Gone are the days that the negotiating factor is being young. We need to acquire a new trading agency. Now the strength lies in what you know and what you can do. So, the clarion call is you need to develop yourself. As young people, we can't wait again to keep on telling them to invite us to the table. As long as we can create the structures ourselves, we can scale the structures, and we can monitor the kind of impact that we are creating at the grassroots, I believe that indeed we can ensure that the SDGs is being achieved by 2030. So, develop yourself, engage your community leaders, stand up for what you believe in, and show up in your space of responsibility. Thank you.
Gideon, we spoke over lunch about various different things, and one thing that I thought was really interesting is when you mentioned even now kind of that there is this idea that kind of youth are just enthusiastic, so kind of like benefit off of that without thinking how to really kind of include perspectives of young people into policy development processes. What I found interesting is that in the way that you run your organization and the initiatives that you're starting, you're yourself also thinking about then how are the young people who are affected by this included in what I do? Do you want to share maybe with the people here of kind of how do you design projects in the organization when you approach schools and when you try to kind of deliver aid? How do you make sure that that aid is really beneficiary for the beneficiaries?
From the African Leadership Academy that promotes the idea of entrepreneurial leadership. And I think it's an engagement that young people can actually leverage on. The belief that for you to be able to create sustainable impact at the grassroots, you need to have a formulation built on something called build. The first thing is for you to believe. The second is for you to understand, you invent, you listen, and you deliver. So there are so many frameworks that has been designed that passionate young people can adopt in order to ensure that their passion can be translated into impact. So what I did in 2014, when I was passionate about education, I was studying biochemistry. But being outspoken is not enough. Being charismatic is not enough. How can you ensure that you can actually do things that is sustainable? So I stumbled on the UNESCO model of quality education that comprises of 5 components. So it's not just about standing up and saying, I know about these things. It's about translating it. So this UNESCO model of quality education comprises of learners, learning environment, content, processes, and learning outcomes. So what we did at Area High then, until now, is we designed projects and programs according to this model. However, before we design, we asked them, what exactly do you think are the challenges you're facing in reduce learning outcomes in your schools? When we question them, they tell us we conduct needs assessment survey also in the schools, and we are able to identify the needs of the schools. And using that model that I spoke about, we are able to design projects to ensure that we can translate a wide thing for young people to do, but ensure that you have so many of these toolkits that you can always leverage on without waiting for anybody to teach you what to do. You can always leverage on available resources at your disposal.
those who this initiative is concerned of into decision making. I think that's really cool, and I hope that if you one day become a prime minister, president,
thank you,
that you'll have the same approach of including those that are concerned of whatever you're doing. And then we also, just one last question is, because in the beginning I kind of asked kind of who are people here with, and there were a lot of people from NGOs that are not youth-led, but obviously they're interested in the topic because they showed up here. So how would you, like, would you have anything to suggest to them? So if they're not in the places of kind of power over public governance, but they're just kind of NGOs working on a grassroots level or any other level, how would you kind of, what would you tell them? How can they include young people better in their work?
Okay, so I'll make it very practical. So many organizations have youth engagement mechanisms, and I will speak about the Women Deliver initiative. How many of us know about Women Deliver? Okay, Women Deliver have a young leaders program, which I think is one of the most effective in the world. The organization is focused on sexual and reproductive health, education and services at the grassroots for young leaders who are promoting the well-being and rights of women and girls across the world. They train them, they connect them, they provide a platform for the world, from education to water to climate change to sexual and reproductive health to deforestation. So any organization that is dedicated to a particular social challenge or social problem or social issue can also do the same thing. Identify these really passionate and enthusiastic young leaders who do not have the resources, connect them with other young leaders who are doing the similar thing, provide the resources for them to be able to translate that passion that they show into real results at the grassroots. I think if a lot of organizations can model that kind of an engagement mechanism, we will be able to ensure that young leaders are not only being brought to the table, they can be included as key development partners.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Dejan.